Hello and welcome to the Blessings in the Streets podcast. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts, and in studio with me today is a brother that I have had the pleasure of knowing since far back as our college days. I mean, we've literally known each other coming up on 35 years, if you can believe that. It's been a long time since we've had a chance to chop it up, and he's taking the time out of his busy schedule to hang out with us this evening, and I'm so appreciative of that. This brother is a husband, he's a father, but most importantly, he's a man of God. And so today he's going to share with us a bit of his journey, a bit of his story with the hopes of encouraging and inspiring others, particularly when it comes to dealing with adversities and challenges of life. So it is my privilege and honor, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you my brother and friend, Mr. Kendrick Davis. Kendrick, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I greatly
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Absolutely,
And
my
so,
brother.
yeah, definitely an honor to be here. Looking forward to our conversation. And you'll obviously learn a little bit about what's happened in the years that have passed since you and I have last seen each other. And so, real excited about that.
I am as well, man. I've been looking forward to this conversation. It's long overdue. So, so with that said, man, we're gonna jump right into it. But before we get into our segments, I do want to give you an opportunity to give a general introduction to our audience, if you would. You know who you are, where you're from, what you do. Kind of give them a little taste of who is Kendrick Davis.
Yeah, and so I'm, as you've already stated, first and foremost, I'm a follower of Christ. I'm a small business owner. I actually live in the sunny state of Colorado. I'm from Wisconsin, born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I've been here since 2008. And husband, father, brother, son, still a son, thank God. Um, so I have three children, one wife. So the Bible talks about the wife of your youth. I have one of those. And so we've been married now 26 years, coming up on 27.
That is awesome, man. Coming up on 27 years. That is phenomenal. And of course, I've been, the way I've been obviously able to keep in touch with you over the years is following you through social media. And you have a beautiful family, man. I
Thank
can
you.
tell that you are truly a proud father. And I can see that it's a really close knit family. And of course, it looks like you've been very successful in your small business adventures. So, I mean, it's just awesome, man, to just see that, just the
Yeah,
growth and the success over the years. Again, we've known each other since we were still teenagers in college, and just
yeah,
thinking about what we were thinking about then, and just to see our lives progress. And so it's always awesome to see, another brother that I knew back at that time, and just to see life has been good to you, and just God has had his hands on you as well. Because we weren't talking about God a whole lot back then,
I was gonna
but
say,
but
wasn't thinking about a whole lot of anything back then.
right. We're just kind of out
Just
there
the
doing
little
whatever,
basic thoughts.
whatever was coming around. So, but yeah, it's just the growth and maturity, but spiritually in
Yeah,
particular, man, it's just powerful and awesome to see that in you, man. And I'm real proud about all that you've been doing in your
man,
life
thank
in
you.
this time, man. That's awesome. So with that said, man, we're gonna go and get know a little bit more about you. So I'm a firm believer, when we're talking about our journeys, our stories in life, you really can't capture the full essence of it, man, if you don't go back to the beginnings, that foundational basis where it all starts. Because I truly do believe that there's a connection with what happens in the beginning to what ultimately leads us into our purpose in life and our journey, and the different things that kind of cross our paths. So if you would kind of reflect back, take us back to the days growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for those who may be checking out our episode and they're not familiar with what life is like in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Tell us, what was it like for you growing up? Fond memories that you have about growing up, as well as if there was any specific challenges that come to mind that impacted your growing up. Please share that with us. Kind of walk us through what coming up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin was like for you.
Yeah, I would ask that you please don't Google Milwaukee, Wisconsin today because it's so much different. It was rough when I was a kid, but it's something different today. And so like I said, grew up. Actually, I was an only child for 14 years. So fortunate had both my parents, my mom and my dad, and as a small child, actually spent a lot of time with my mother's mother, my grandmother. She passed away when I was 5, and so really those moments I really remember with her. I was really close with my grandma, uh, and then later on, when I was 12, my father's mother passed away. And so I had no grandmothers at that point. My parents did get divorced when I was 10. They separated when I was 10, divorced when I was 11. And so, you know, but I was still very close with both of them. I think my mom really did a great thing for me in that she actually didn't go after my father for child support. And so, my dad and we were together every weekend. Um, and so I spent a lot of time, between the two of them, learning how to get my head peeled in spades and getting better at spades. I could probably beat most adults at the age of 12, 13 years old, because we did a lot of spades growing up. And honestly, my parents, they didn't have a horrible relationship. They just couldn't be married. Right? They couldn't live. They didn't know how to live together. Uh, but watching them over the years, how they stayed very friendly, always joking. My most fond conversations with them was actually while I was in college. And so, going back a little further, when I was about 10 years old, I had twin cousins that moved to Milwaukee from Mississippi, which is where my mom is from. And so I grew up with them. We were like brothers. We did everything together. The three of us. It's funny because when we were young, we'd ride our bikes everywhere, and people would ask us if we were triplets, which is funny because I was about a foot taller than both of them our entire life, right? So, so real fond memories. I think back to my childhood, and there were things that were tough because I grew up in the inner city. Like I didn't know it, right? I tell my kids all the time, you all have never had to shake your shoes before you put them on in the morning, right?
Mhm.
I had to shake my shoes every morning, but I just didn't think anything of it. I was a kid that if you'd have told me we were poor, I would not have known it. And so if my parents really sacrificed, they made sure I had every potential advantage in life that they could offer, that they could give me. So I went to Catholic schools all the way up through actually until I went to college. So chose to go to an all boys Jesuit high school just because they offered the best possible education. Right. So I had my pick of schools coming out of middle school, and I decided to go to this all boys Jesuit high school. And that, of course, was probably one of the smartest things I can say growing up that I did. For one, I played multiple sports growing up, and so started playing baseball when I was very young. I was a playground kid in school, so everybody knew how to play, football, and so me juking you with my penny loafers was nothing. Could get that done. And so when I got to high school, ended up really focusing in on those two sports as well. Did very well. Three of the 4 years I was in high school, we won state in football. My senior year, now I didn't play basketball, but I was around some pretty talented kids. Clearly, winning state in football, but in basketball, my high school senior year basketball team was I think 19th or 18th in the nation, USA Today. I could probably name some of these people because a number of them played D1. So I was surrounded by a lot of winning. Even in baseball, my little league baseball team, we won a lot, right? So I grew up around and had the opportunity to engage with a lot of talented people. And then I went to an all boys Jesuit high school. For those of you that know Milwaukee, the school is Marquette University High School. And so I was also around a bunch of smart people, not just people with money, which I wasn't one of them, but people who were really smart. And so I think when you're in those types of environments, you push yourself, right? Because you're trying to achieve as well. And so I did, right? I pushed myself. I pushed myself in the gym. I pushed myself in the classroom. Um, it was the reason I chose that school, I guess. And so again, just a lot of success in those arenas. Um, but the struggle was really dealing with my parents once they got divorced, uh, and my father having lost his mother. He didn't handle that very well. So there's a long period of time there, and I'm sure we'll get into it later. But there's a long period of time there where I actually didn't have my father,
Hmm.
and for a kid growing up, having your dad, especially a son, right? Having your dad and then losing your dad without your dad dying,
Hmm.
or I can't say my father abandoned me. He just didn't know how to mentally cope with and emotionally with losing his mom. He was really close to his mom. I didn't find all this out until much later, but there's a nice long period of time there, including through college, that I didn't have my father around.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow, wow. Oh, first off, I appreciate your transparency and sharing that. You know, there's a few takeaways I have as you were talking about your childhood, some things that I completely relate to. Of course, anytime I have guests, that kind of in the same age bracket as myself, one of the common things that I keep constantly hearing, and it just lets me know, it just reaffirms for me the truth in that is, the fact of how we came up with households, even if they were single parent households or households that used to be both parents in there, that maybe the finances weren't there or what have you, how we just didn't know that we were as financially deprived as on paper as what we really were. And it's a testament to just how our parents were back then. They just created an environment where it didn't get focused on how much money was there, but it was more about the family
Yes,
unit. I think that community was a real thing. Back in those days, back in the 70s, growing up, that was a real thing, whether it was in your house or just in the immediate neighborhood where people just looked out for you. And so, like you said, you didn't really think, are we really poor? I mean, if somebody would have said it to you, it might have started a fight because, like, no, I'm not
yeah.
poor. Because we
No, that's
didn't
right.
get locked in on that, and
Yeah,
then and as you stated, because I've had the same conversation with my own child, we grow up having come up in situations like that, and we look forward to being successful in life and making a quote unquote better life for our kids. And it's great that we're able to, but then there's a part of it sometimes I think we think for some reason, what we had when we were coming up, wasn't good enough for them. And sometimes I wish they would have had some of those experiences so they could appreciate, what it was like. Like you used the scenario about having to shake your shoes, and you didn't explain what that meant, but I know what that means.
that's
And
right.
anybody who
As
understands,
much.
I know what that means. I had to shake
Yeah,
my shoes. I know what it means to,
yeah,
to not necessarily be rocking the latest, designer gear and all that kind of stuff, and pops getting teased about that and things like that. I mean, and then just the fact that your parents made it a point to you know put you in a position to have a good education because they understood the value of that. You know um and then I love the fact that which I totally related to as well. You mentioned about when your parents split, your mom didn't go after your dad, in terms of child support. And my parents were never married, but that was something that my mom never did. She never went after my dad for child support, and she never prevented us from having a relationship. And I appreciate that. And I heard that in what you were saying, because again, we fast forward today, so oftentimes when mom and dad don't work out, there's this contention, you can't see your kid, or there may be bashing, whether it's bashing of the dad or bashing of the mom, and it just creates a confusion. And it's unfortunate because the person who ultimately is hurt is the kids, because
yeah.
they're not
That's right.
getting that relationship opportunity. Just because the two of you didn't work out doesn't mean that we shouldn't have an opportunity to do that as well. So to have our own relationship. So I was glad to hear that your mom made it possible for that to happen and still was able to maintain a cordial relationship with your dad, despite the fact that marriage wise it just didn't
Right,
pan out. Because sometimes that just happens, but it doesn't mean that you have to ruin that experience for the kids. It's already going to be hard enough for the kids if they've gone being used to having your parents both there and then now they're split apart, if you're not blocking that opportunity for both healing and just for the building of a relationship. So I appreciate all of those elements that you threw in there. And then I think the last thing that jumps out to me is the fact that, your successes in life, you acknowledge that as being, I had a chance to be around winning. I had a chance to be around intelligence. And so as a result of being around that, it pushed me to strive and to work harder to be a better version of myself. And I think that is really critical too, because especially when you talk about, the fact that you were in sports, because to me, and again, they may call us old school, old heads for thinking like this, but I appreciate your version of winning because I didn't feel like it was manufactured. Like I went to school, I played sports, and I tried my best to excel at that sport, and so did other kids that I played with, and that's why we won. Versus, I'm a purposely go to this school because I'm trying to purposely lock in with kids who I think is going to fix the game to make us win. Not that we're working hard together, but we're just trying to stack the team, so to speak, to win.
Yeah.
We see that so much in sports these days, and parents will swap their kids from school to school year after
Yes, sir.
year and all that
Absolutely.
kind of stuff. Versus again the old school way where, hey, we just went to school together, we worked hard, and we fought our way to be successful. And as you stated, you saw that success on the football level, you saw that success on the basketball level, you saw that success even in baseball, which
Yep.
I like that part too, because as black kids, particularly black boys, we don't even see the love of baseball anymore like we used to
Very
when we
true.
were kids. That for many of us, that was more exciting to us than basketball or football. And it's crazy
It
that
was my baseball was my favorite sport to play.
that was my favorite sport growing up was baseball. And I'm not even nowhere near athletic, but it was my sport of choice. If I had a
Yep.
chance to play any sport, that was going to be at the top of my list. So it's just the relatability of some of the things that you shared that I didn't know about you. That again, same type of experiences, man, and it just kind of brings back those memories and that joy of what that life was like. So we didn't have the bad lives that a lot of times we sometimes kind of confuse ourselves into thinking that we had. We had good lives, and
Yes.
we need to pull those lessons and those experiences out to pour into our kids and their kids as well. So that again, so they can have an appreciation for what they do have and understand that this just doesn't grow in the backyard. It just doesn't happen. That
Right.
there's some hard work and effort that's put into it. So appreciate you
I,
sharing
I
that, man. Those are
I mean,
some.
I tell my kids all the time, especially when they were younger, like, we go outside, we go outside. As long as we came in before the street lights came on, some of
There
you
you
will get,
go.
but, but when there was nothing organized for us to do, we made up stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
and didn't think twice about it. If it rained, we'd race sticks to the gutters, right? Right. So we just did all kinds of things growing up that unfortunately, I don't, our kids didn't have the same kind of opportunities. I think what you were saying earlier, um, how I relate to it is some of what people would deem our struggle made us better.
Yes.
And we didn't, and our kids didn't have the same opportunity to have similar struggles. And so, you know, and again, we'll get into it, but I have two pretty athletic boys, and one of them I think is exceptionally talented in basketball. He's also the biggest one of us, but his will to push through,
Hmm.
uh, like I had to be the one to push him. There was he had no struggles growing up. There was no external thing, nothing external to push him. Whereas we kind of grew up in it. I mean, I grew up in. I was literally there were opposing gangs within 2 blocks of me.
Hmm.
Right, if I cross the street, I'm in another gang's territory. Um, and for the most part, I was fortunate. I mean, I did pretty well in sports, even at a young age. And so oftentimes they would see me coming back home with my baseball uniform on, or, coming from football practice or even basketball practice, because I played basketball up through ninth grade. And so, not that they were saying leave that kid alone. They just kind of did. They left me and my cousins uh,
Mm-hmm.
alone. I can't remember ever once being approached to join a gang as a kid.
Yeah.
Not once. And my father wasn't there. I was I was living with my mom. I would be what they would consider probably a perfect candidate because I don't have a dad and I need someone to attach myself to and all. But they just didn't. They saw us doing what we were doing, and we pretty much got left alone.
Mhm. And I think that was just the kind of the sign of the times back then. It was like if you were one of those kids that you just looked like you kind of had your head on your shoulders, like I said, even if your dad wasn't around or whatever, it was almost like it was a code, like an unwritten code where the gang members or the local the local neighborhood drunk or whatever, they would be the ones that would a lot of times giving you those lessons and those lectures or just leaving you alone altogether because they were like, no, we're not going to mess with him. He got his head on right now. If you look like you was a knucklehead out here just wilding out, then yeah, you might as well go and come on with us because it's clear that you're not doing anything with
Right? You
school
ain't doing them better
or
with
anything
yourself.
else. So you might as well just roll with us,
Yeah.
and do that. But it was,
Yeah.
it was again, it was almost like an unofficial, unwritten, like I said, just a code of conduct and how you got treated. And then of course, as we fast forward today, knowing what your faith life is like, I also have to, give credit to the fact that God had purpose for you. And
Right.
so whether we realized it or not, you had a covering over you that, that ultimately shielded you from that stuff because
Yeah.
God saw
Jeremiah,
something in
Jeremiah
you.
29:11.
There you go. He had
Yeah.
plans for you. He saw it for you, even when you didn't even know what it was going to be.
Right.
God said, "No, he's got to be protected. I got to watch out for him because I got some stuff for him to do. He's going to be all right." So, yeah, they're going to leave him alone. They're not going to mess with him. He's not going to have to fear that every day. He's going to be able to walk right through it and be okay. So, again, back then didn't realize it, but I certainly do acknowledge that, in these
Right.
days, now that I have a better understanding, now that you have a better understanding as well, of what that means, God's presence in your life, whether it's out boldly out front or behind the scenes, he's always around us. He's protecting his. So, and I believe that that's what he did for you. So, that's awesome,
And
man.
I,
Awesome.
I didn't say this earlier, but I think that because my parents clearly loved me, right? And I mentioned, I went to an all boys Jesuit high school, so I could say some names of people that whose sons I went to school with that were famous people, right?
Mhm.
I played against a kid that most people wouldn't know is Nick Van Exel. Like most people know who
Okay.
Nick Van Exel is. Nick Van
Mhm.
Exel was in my conference, right? It was the first time that I probably had spent any time around people with wealth,
Mhm.
um, and because I didn't know I was poor, even once I got to high school, like I didn't know I was lacking.
Mhm.
I was never jealous. I never thought twice about it. I was just as happy to get on the city bus to go to and from home and to school, right? Um, it just, none of it registered. I think about this all the time now, how that stuff didn't register. I was around kids whose parents had serious wealth, and I didn't even bat an eye. And I remember my senior year, one of the kids had a party, a graduation party, and invited everyone. I mean, I went to our school was it was about 1,000 boys, but my graduating class was about 260. And I go to this kid lives on the east side of Milwaukee, and if you know anything about the east side, it's along the lake, Lake Michigan, and that's where the extreme wealth exists. So I get to this house, huge yard, everyone can fit in the back in the yard. Um, it was just and again, nothing like I realized this person was wealthy, but I did not in any way, shape, or form think they were better or had it better necessarily
Mhm.
than me.
I love that,
So
man. I love that, and that's a testament to, again, your parents and how they raised you, how they positioned you to basically believe in yourself, to know, you know what, yeah, they may have a little bit more than me right now. They may have some access to some things, but I don't feel less than. I feel like I
right.
belong. I feel like I can get it just like they can. They just maybe got a little bit of it sooner than me, but doesn't mean that I'm out of it. And that's why I commented earlier about your emphasis about I was around winning culture. I was
Yeah,
around, success, and it clearly you embraced that and owned it for yourself. Like, that can be me too, in whatever it is that I ultimately delve into, whether it was sports or in some other field of work. So yeah, that's powerful, man. That is some,
yeah,
and I hope my listeners are grabbing hold to these gems that you already are dropping. This is some for real stuff. But
yeah,
ultimately, again, I ultimately take it back to God's covering over you. It was just the stepping stone. It was the beginning of what was to be. And so that's why I like having that beginnings conversation that we're having now, because
yeah,
it speaks so much to where you are now versus, back then, what was developing, what was building up, what was manifesting itself. So that's awesome, man. Awesome.
yeah,
So, Kendrick, of course, as we go through life, especially as we get into adulthood, you live long enough. There's going to be a series of experiences that you encounter, and some of those experiences, of course, are going to consist of life storms, and some of those storms are going to be a little bit heavier than other storms. So much so to the point that every now and then we get hit with a storm that, it's something that we question, like, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to overcome this? I mean, I'm usually pretty good at navigating my way through, but every now and then I get hit with that situation where I don't see a way out. I'm doubting, even if I'm somebody, a person of faith, I'm still questioning, why God, why this, why, how am I supposed to make it? So if you would kind of think about and share with us, if you would, a time where you felt like that was kind of the situation that you were in. Clearly you're here today, so we can trust and believe that God led you through. But again, at that time, you might have not saw that way through. You might have not saw that way out. So if you would kind of share with us a time when you experienced such a thing, and what was ultimately that turning point where you started to perhaps see a little light at the end of the tunnel, where you were kind of coming up out of that situation.
yeah. Hey, listen, both of them involve my dad. I mean,
Mm.
and so I already mentioned the fact that they got divorced. Not long after that, I probably didn't say the age right, but when I was 12, my dad's mother died.
Mm.
He didn't handle it very well, and what I mean by that is, my dad uh, started, you know, dealing with hard stuff, harder drugs. He, my dad smoked marijuana all my childhood, like probably since he was, 16, 17 years old. But after he lost his mom, he didn't know how to handle that. And so he started, really down kind of a dark path, uh, which then caused me not to see my dad. So from about the time I was 13 or 14, 13, all the way up until about 21, uh, I can count on one hand how many times I saw my father,
Mm.
and we were really close. Uh, and it, obviously, much later in life is when I realized how that impacted me, not having him, because it was tough. That was used to having my dad was my biggest cheerleader. So when it
Mm.
came to sports, um, you know, I always say I would have gone much further had my dad been around through, especially those years in particular. There was just things I pushed myself, but I would have pushed much further had my dad been around. So that was tough. And then we come back together. Kind of a long story short. While I was in school, it hit me really hard one day. So I wrote my dad a letter and mailed it to him. And in that letter, I basically said, you know, we're not we're not father and son. Make sure somebody lets me know when you die, because as of right now, you're already dead. At least to
Mm.
me, right? It was receiving that letter. My dad immediately checked himself into rehab and got himself straight. So shortly thereafter, I ended up coming back to Milwaukee from where we were in college. And my dad and I were able to have some really good conversations while he was in rehab. Like I never knew how my parents had met. My dad's from Arkansas, my mom's from Mississippi. They both ended up in Milwaukee because of older siblings, or well, actually, my dad just was trying to get away from small town Arkansas, and so learned a lot about my parents in those conversations. Um, a couple of years or so later, my dad remarried, and roughly 3 years later, so in 1996, February 96, my dad passed away.
Mm.
So uh, it was in that time that I met my now wife. Um, she and I, when she and I started dating, she had just given her life to the Lord. About the year or so before, 94, she had given her life to the Lord. My dad, through rehab, had given his life to the Lord. And so before he dies now, and I honestly did not believe he was going to die. He had cancer. When the word talks about the wages of sin is death, I think sometimes we kind of confuse that, and we think of a physical death, and that's not always the case, or it's not always immediate. And so my father, paid for a decade of punishing his body with drugs, right? So, and I hate to say it that way, but it's just that's how it was given to me. That's how God kind of gave it to me. It's like, the wages of sin is death, and no, though death was not immediate, um, the sins he was committing against his body over time, it paid. The toll had to be paid, right? And so, and I say all that. My dad was the healthiest person I knew growing up. Like if my dad got a cold, you wouldn't know it because it was gone in a day. And if I got a cold, the first thing he says, "What you taking? What are you taking?"
Right.
He kept Formula 44D in the cabinet, right? First time I ever had a hot toddy, my dad made it because he just was never sick. I never saw my dad sick. And so, um, so he passed away, and that is where the toughest thing I had to ever deal with occurred, was dealing with my dad um, passing away,
Mm.
because we had just rekindled our relationship. We were, just getting close again, and he passes. Uh, and I didn't realize at the time. Obviously, I had given my life to the Lord before he passed. In fact, you know, however you feel, however your audience feels about this, um, uh, I was at a prayer meeting with my father when, and so in his presence, when my gift of speaking in tongues occurred. So, just an amazing moment, something that I didn't even know whether it was real or not until it happened to me. Right. Um, and so I struggled with that. I didn't think I was going to struggle with it. But I struggled with it. And it took almost 12 years for me to come out of the funk. I mean, I separated myself from a lot of people, including family. My wife and I got married about 8 months or so after my father died. Uh, and even in that relationship, I kind of pushed everybody. I kept everyone at arm's length.
Mhm.
Uh, and it wasn't intentional. And I didn't think, it wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened. Um, and it was about 12 years. Man, it took about 12 years for me to move through that, move past that.
Wow. 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 Um, again, thank you for your transparency and sharing that. But what a powerful, powerful story. I mean, it's like you said, it's something already that the fact that again, your dad was your biggest cheerleader, and then
Yeah,
he's having his own struggle with losing his mom, which is understandable. You know, if you don't have the coping skills, if you don't, and more importantly, if you don't have that relationship with
yeah,
Christ,
we love the Lord for
you
sure.
don't have the Lord. and you go through something like that, when we talk about, God never putting more on you than you can bear, I only accept that from the standpoint of that's assuming you have a relationship with him. Because if you're
Yeah.
flying solo and you get hit with something like losing a mom, which you obviously he was close to, that is going to be more than you can bear. And unfortunately, you now seek out sources of relief and comfort that aren't going to necessarily be healthy releases, healthy comfort sources. In this case, it was getting off into heavier drug usage, and it also separated him from that relationship with you, which now left you vulnerable and open. Because, like, what am I supposed to do? My biggest cheerleader is not here. I can't talk to him. I can't connect with him. You said that several years go by and you can count on one hand how many times you even connected with him. So the devastation on your end, but then also at that time, you also had not, connected with, having a relationship with Christ. So it's like, here you were both outside of that relationship with Christ, not having that connection, both needing that connection for different reasons. But again, this is how God works. Little did you know, he would use one of your most painful moments, being separated from dad, that propels you to write a letter, to let it all out, to express to your dad how the hurt that you're feeling by this. And that letter, as painful as it was, as harsh as that was, it was a blessing for your dad because it
Yeah.
triggered what he needed at that time to go get cleaned up. You said he entered into rehab. That is, I don't believe that. And for my listeners, please understand that is not random. That is not an accident. That is all God, divine intervention, in that he used you to save your father,
Yeah.
to
And let me
save
tell
your
you something.
father.
There's something, I think there's again, I get what I'm saying. It's pretty harsh, but there's a level of selfishness, um, that I didn't understand, until, again, while my dad was in rehab. Some of the best conversations I've had with a parent, period. And my
Mm-hmm.
mom is still alive. So, but, and I think one day I was there and I asked him why, like, what, why did you just, fall into the abyss, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much? And he said something that, again, always stuck with me. He said, I didn't think I was hurting anybody but myself.
Mm.
And at the time, I was my dad's only child, right? So, the thought process, and I think this is some of the things that have shaped how I am with my own kids. But the mindset that I can't deal with what's happening, so I'm going to just go do whatever. Because if I hurt myself, I'm not hurting anyone else, right? And think that, the collateral damage, right? We don't, human men don't consider the collateral damage of, uh, because I think my response was, but, but you left me, right? Like,
Mm.
you left me. Now I'm an adult when we're having this conversation. I think I was probably 21 or so. We're having this conversation, but I'm thinking all those things have really, again, kind of guided how I am with my kids. I'm I'm super intentional about, being mindful of what they need, how I can help. And again, I've never, our kids aren't, I didn't spoil my kids. In fact, my kids all operate pretty independently now. They're young adults. Um, but I, they needed to know that dad would always be there
Mm.
no matter what. And I may be tough on them sometimes. But in their greatest hour of need, they could always know they can reach out to me.
Love that, man. I mean, just there's so much power in your story, man. I mean, like I said, you saved your dad's life, and with that letter, God puts that on your heart to send that to him. He gets cleaned up, and in the midst of getting cleaned up, he gets spiritually cleaned up by giving
Yeah.
his life to Christ, and then you follow suit and you give your life to Christ.
Hmm.
And even then, that was because now what his hurt the hurt and pain that he was going through in the losing of his mom, and then finding Christ, getting in that relationship to help him come up out of that situation. You now needed to get into a relationship with Christ, because little did you know that there was going to be a devastating battle that was going to cross you, which was losing your dad, like
Yep.
officially by him passing. And so if you don't have that relationship with God, you could have potentially gone down a similar
That's correct.
path of
I've thought
events,
about
if you
that many
will.
times.
You could have similarly gone through that. And so it was almost like God was, foretelling for you, kind of giving you the preview, like, okay, you saw what happened with your dad when he lost his mom. It devastated him. It crushed him because of how close he was. You don't know it yet, but you're about to lose your dad. But I'm preparing you through
Yeah.
my relationship so that when it happens, it's going to hurt, but you're going to survive it. You'll never forget it. You'll never get over it, but you'll be able to move forward through it because of me, because of that relationship that you formed with me. And so it was almost like you needed each other to save each other, to
Yeah.
to save each other from hurting yourselves and hurting others. Because if you had gone down that path, then you might have forgotten, just like your dad forgot momentarily, about others that might be hurt. Like in
Yeah.
your case, it would have been your spouse or perhaps your kids,
Yep.
or whatever, and you wouldn't have wanted to do that. God said, no, I'm going to position you to where that doesn't happen. And I'm going to let you go through this journey, this storm, a storm that's not going to take you out. It's going to be rough, but with me, you're going to get through it okay. And that's what makes your story so seamlessly powerful, and the connection of the dots in this scenario. And again, audience, please understand, this is not random. This is not luck. This is all divine intervention, God moving, knowing at the exact moment in time when what was needed and how it was to be positioned and planned out. That's just the perfection in who God is. You couldn't have scripted that any better. You wouldn't have been able to, because
Right.
it's not a worldly plan. It's not a worldly, mapping out, if you will. God was all over that, and I know you're thankful for that, and I'm
I
thankful
am.
for you that it played out like that. So even in the most difficult time that you had with your dad, when he finally does pass, despite the hurt, you were able to pass with a on good terms with your dad.
Yeah.
I miss you,
Absolutely.
Dad, but we didn't go out with me hating you or having lack of forgiveness for what took place. You've cleansed yourself of that beforehand, so it was able to transition itself the way that it did. And so I have a great respect for what you did and how you handled it, and just again, just an admiration for how God moves. I had a similar, not the exact same situation, but I had that turning point in my relationship with my dad where I kind of felt some kind of way about his absence in my life, even though my mom didn't block us from a relationship. I remember it, and it was during college
Mm.
where, my mom was, it was her normal procedure when I would come home from school, come home from college, you know, let's go see your dad. He'd be glad to see you. And I remember going to visit him. And I even talked about this in my book, going to visit him at his job. And normally I
Mm.
would be cool and excited about it. But that one day I wasn't. And it just hit me that, I'm practically an adult, and you didn't have really any thing to do with getting me to this point. And I felt
Mm.
some kind of way about that. And I broke down, and my mom and my dad are looking at me like, what's wrong? And it just came out like I was
Yeah.
over it. And as far as I was concerned, kind of to what you said to your dad, my mindset at that time was like, if I never talk to you again, I'm okay with that because you haven't been here, And I had that moment of not talking, and my mom, being who she was, said, don't do that. Please, find it in your heart to forgive him and come up out of that and talk to him. And I'm glad that I listened to that advice, because we were able to reconcile from that, and I didn't make it a permanent thing. And I saw growth in my dad in terms of him giving his life to Christ and being very active in his church. And he would ultimately become a deacon even in his church, which is ironic because I'm a deacon in my church. And I would have never imagined either one of those scenarios happen for either one of us, And then, of course, when he finally does pass, I'm hurt just like you were hurt with your dad passing, but I was also at peace knowing that we ended on good terms, and
Terms.
and it wasn't this bitterness, it wasn't this hatred. And so again, that's all God, man, all over that. So
Let me
uh
let me, if I can,
yes,
hopefully
absolutely.
encourage encourage other fathers. You know, I remember my dad's last words to me,
Mm.
and they happened to be words I never heard from him until the day before he passed away. Um, and I'm at the hospital with him, and out of nowhere, he just says, "I'm proud of you."
Mm.
And my dad had never said that to me, and those were the last words that I got from my dad. And I can't tell you, you know, when you don't feel like you're as a child, right, as a son, when you don't feel like you have gotten where you think you should be or you've not achieved, having a father tell you they're proud of you, and having that in the back of your mind, it lets you know you're right where you need to be.
Mhm.
Keep moving forward. So I did, you know, it definitely wasn't all bad, but it was tough.
Yeah.
But that was, again, a moment I'll never forget. Right. So it's these little things. It's funny. Most of my mid 20s kind of a blur. My early mid 20s kind of a blur. But those things, you never forget them.
That's wonderful, man. And I don't know if you paid attention to the title for our episode this evening. I've entitled a transformational moment, and that's what you've been speaking about. You had
Mm,
a transformational moment. And again, man, just God all over that. I love the story, man. This is wonderful. And as you said, fathers, please hear this. I don't care if things didn't work out with the mom or whatever. Your children, and particularly fathers, your sons,
yeah.
they need to hear that. I mean, I'm sure as you were saying those last words, there are probably a lot of people on the edge of their seats thinking, he said, I love you. And not to say I love you isn't good, but there's
Right.
something about I'm proud of you
Proud of you.
that even
And
feels like it's like love on steroids. I'm proud of you. I
yeah,
don't just love you. I'm proud of you. Man,
yeah.
that just
And trust me, I understand the biblical consequences of pride. But as a son from a father, it's good to know that you were not just loved but appreciated, as far as what you've done, how I had led my life up to that point. That's my dad saying, how you've led your life up to this point is better than I could have done if I had been in your shoes. And I'm proud of the man you've become. Um, so,
Yeah, man. That's deep, man. I got chills just when you're just hearing you say, I'm proud of you, and just feeling this, man. I could feel your emotions with this, and just what that must have been like, especially in that moment. So that's great stuff, man.
man,
Great stuff. Um, so Kendrick, I'm curious, when you find yourself, facing challenging times. I know you've mentioned some pretty heavy stuff, but not all storms are going to be, monumental or great
right.
in nature. Sometimes they're just regular, everyday life and type stuff. What I'm curious to know from you is when you are facing adversity or dealing with challenging moments, what is your routine, your process, your regimen, if you will, that you like to go through that kind of helps you work through those challenging times in a healthy and productive manner? I'm curious to know what does that look like for you when you're in such a moment?
Yeah. And so, a lot of men will relate to what I'm about to say. So I'm kind of a fixer, right? You don't realize it until you're trying to fix everyone around you. And I'm not talking about change them. I'm talking about whatever situation they're dealing with, you're the one that's trying to fix it.
Mm.
My daughter called me this morning, upset about something, and I don't know what to do. Okay. I need to first stop crying, breathe, let's talk, right? Let's have. So I'm kind of a fixer. That's not always a good thing, but generally speaking, it's just my personality. Um, and so going back to what happened with my father, after my father, you've already said, thank goodness I had come into a relationship with Christ. I grew a lot when my dad got sick. I grew, so I got saved after coming back to Milwaukee. I'd lived in Central Illinois for a couple years. Um, Came back home when I found out my dad was sick. Uh, Probably within 4 months. In fact, it was within 4 months of me coming back is when I gave my life to Christ. I found myself in a good church. And so one of the things I've learned over the years really is to have good men around me. So I have about three men that I keep around me. When I was younger, I used to say, you got to have somebody in your life that's willing to tell you you're whack. And, and for those that might be a little bit younger, don't know what the word whack means, look it up. So just Google it. And so and so I've managed to grow in relationship with these men through church. These are men that became friends of mine in Milwaukee. I don't live there anymore, right? So we still are in constant contact with each other. Um, so when I'm going through something, because I'm a fixer, sometimes I tend to internalize and not, um, you know, I understand again what I'm saying may not register very well with some people. Like I can't go to my wife. And I think the reason I can't go to my wife is because I'm a fixer, and for her to, and we're growing. By the way, we're growing in that place. I'm getting better um, because I realize there's wisdom. God has given her wisdom in some areas that can really help me. But typically over the years, I've gone to these other men and said, okay, here's what I'm dealing with. You know, I know they'll pray with me. I know they'll pray for me. And I know they'll give me advice that is godly, no different than what I attempt to do when I'm trying to fix someone else's problem. And so adversity today looks very different because I did internalize everything with my dad for 12 years. I like didn't talk it out with anyone. I didn't go get counseling. Like it was just me and God. That's it, right? But I think we miss out on how we're created sometimes when you're like me, where you just kind of internalize things and you try and fix it within your own self. You miss sight of the fact that God designed us to be relational.
Hmm.
He designed us to be in relationship with others, and that's how we. There would be no why ever say iron sharpens iron. And so as a brother sharpens the countenance, right? And so that's God's way of telling us, like, we need each other to make each other better. Um, and those are some of the things I understood pretty early on after when I got saved, right? Those are some things there's a couple of things, there were by the grace of God. There's certain scriptures that I hung on to, right? If anything that you do causes your brother to stumble, you don't do it, right? And so when I look at how some people will tend to cope with some things, those weren't traps I fell into. Obviously, the drug one was easy because I watched how my dad kind of struggled through that, right? So I wasn't going to go there. Um, Learned very early on, I just don't have a personality that's addictive, if you will. First time I ever went to a casino, I was in college. I was actually, went to Turtle Lake. Uh, so went to it. His friends took me to a casino. I took $30. I lost 25. You know what I've never had a problem with since? Gambling, right? I learned my lesson quickly. And I was like, man, I lost $25. I could use that $25.
Right.
And so I don't have there aren't I don't and I know how bad it sounds as I'm saying it, but God is that's something He's put in me. So there are things I don't cling to. Um, I don't cling to things when I am going through adverse situations. So I don't go to drinking. I don't go to doing drugs. I don't go to gambling. And I'm fortunate that way. I've never had an issue with pornography, right? And I know a lot of men deal with that. I know heck, I've had to walk my boys through it, right? And so, but I do it based on the word of God because I never experienced that. But if you lose a parent, I've experienced that. I can thoroughly minister to you through that because I understand. And it's one of the things I used to say all the time. I'm one of those people that I use I understand very tightly, right? I don't. It's not something I'll use flippantly because I don't always understand, and because I didn't experience it. So when I was walking my boys through some of these things when they were young with pornography, I didn't say to them, "I understand," but I could tell them, "Here are the pitfalls of that." Right? And here's what the word says. Right? But the pitfalls can cause you so much damage down the road. It may feel the pleasure of sin lasts but a moment. Right? It may feel great right now, but in 10, 15 years, you're going to be married and you're going to have these kind of expectations of your wife that you got here.
Mm.
And those expectations are imaginary, right?
Yeah.
And so again, I've been fortunate. And I don't think twice about the fact that I've been fortunate that God has designed me in a certain way. Um, uh, and as long as I don't internalize, I usually can come through something, through adversity pretty well. As long as I'm trying to keep it to myself, I always find myself in trouble because I don't handle it the best way, which was obvious after I lost my dad. I mean, I didn't handle it the best way. And I got married shortly after my father died. I had kids a year or two later. And so here are these young people that absolutely need me. And I can't afford to be distant from them because it's not their fault. So
Wow. Wow. I love that, man. I like the fact that you focus on about I understand, and the way I interpret that is, and I want my listeners to as well. There's sometimes when people are going through and you've gone through a similar situation, sometimes we can be quick to say I understand just because, like let's say you lost a parent, I lost a parent, so I understand. I, I take what you're saying as when you say I understand is I understand what God says about it. I understand what his role is when we're going through challenging times. So that makes me able to relate to you. That makes me be able to engage and show empathy towards you as you're going through. Because, even though you and I both have lost parents, I can't tell you that I know what it's like. Your situation is like as if and that what my situation is like because we had the same circumstances but our experiences are completely different.
yeah,
So when we're talking about understanding, because there's a difference when we talk about that understanding, I understand that storms are going to come my way, that it's not a matter of if but a matter of when. I understand that there's a God that if I'm in relationship with him, he can get me through those storms,
yeah,
and if he can get me
no
through
doubt,
that storm, then he can get you through that storm too. If you're in relationship with him, I understand that. So, and even if it's something that you're going through that I've never experienced before, I understand what his word says about it, so I can share that wisdom with you so you can apply it to your walk, into your life, as you shared with how you've done that with your own sons, just to impart wisdom and knowledge, or with friends or other people that you might know. Yeah, I've never dealt with that. It's never been a challenge of mine, but I know what God says about it. And I
right?
understand these are the pitfalls, these are the landmines that if you're not careful, this is what can, come up out of that, even if it's not something that doesn't happen until years later, when you use the example about marriage. So it's just, I love that emphasis on that understanding part of it. And then the other part too, when you talked about that you're normally a fixer, which I agree, a lot of men are fixers, a lot of men internalize, and a lot of that has to do with just how we were raised. I mean, you think about the traditional way men are imparted into, whether it's by their dads or by other male figures. We're told, you're not supposed to, to show, emotions. You're not supposed
Emotions,
to, express your feelings like that because that makes you weak, that makes you soft, that makes you. And so when you are hurting, because you bought into that mindset, you keeping it all in because I'm a man,
right?
I'm supposed to tough it out, not understanding that you're harming yourself, you're hurting you're causing damage within because you don't have that outlet. And we don't come from
Right.
an age that back then especially the concept of seeking counseling, that wasn't even something on our minds
Right. No,
because,
absolutely.
whether you couldn't afford it or whether you just thought it was for crazy people, and surely I'm not going to do that because, again, that would be showing that I'm weak in some way when we know that that's not the case. So I love that you talked about I have a circle of men in my life,
Yeah.
because sometimes as a man, there's some things that you're going to go through that you just need another brother to talk it to. No
Yep.
offense against your wife. Your wife may be very bright, very discerning, woman of God. Sometimes there's just man stuff that a man needs
Yeah.
to talk to another man. But for our listeners, it's got to be the right man because part of you being able to avoid some of that foolishness is that you got other men of God to talk to, men that will pray with you. They'll pray for you, whether they're praying for you in your face or praying for you behind your back. They're praying for you. They're covering
Yeah.
you. They're the right influence versus if I got the wrong circle of men, which some of us as men have had, when we take our problems to that other man and he says, and he doesn't have a relationship with God, then he's going to tell us, man, what you need to do, we need to just go on out to this spot, and throw back
Yeah.
some drinks or go
Let's
pick up
go
some
have a beer.
women or whatever to get your mind off of this,
Yeah.
and, and it sounds cool. It sounds fun in the moment, but the repercussions of it are not going to be good. So we're seeking, what could otherwise be permanent solutions to temporary problems, and we could be creating issues that go far and beyond what the original situation was to begin with because
Right.
we had that wrong circle around us. So the fact that you have godly men in your circle, just for our men who are listening, have that circle of friends. It doesn't even have to be a large crowd, just a few brothers that you can be real
Yeah.
with, that they'll be real with you, that they'll tell you like it is. They'll be, if they'll call you on whatever your foolishness is. They'll check you, but they'll do it in love. It's not to harm you or to dog you out, but
Yeah.
they'll
Absolutely.
be your form of accountability, if you will. And the same thing will applies to women as well. Have people in your circle that hold you accountable, that are like-minded, that will be able to give you, again, sound godly advice, not just things and having you, encouraging you to do things that are just going to, like I said, make problems or matters worse than what they already are. So yeah, that's good stuff, man. Glad you pointed that out, and I'm glad that that's a part of your routine in dealing with challenging times and adversity. So it's good stuff.
Yeah. Now
So
somebody won't tell you whack. Not somebody
mm,
just gonna tell you you the man
right.
or the woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Kendrick, if you had a chance, man, to speak to the younger Kendrick, when you think about all that you've gone through, experiences that you've had, challenges that you had to deal with and overcome, if you could speak to the younger one, that younger version of yourself, or perhaps there's somebody listening to this episode and they are struggling, they are dealing with some of the things that you used to struggle and deal with mightily, and they don't know a way out. They don't know how to not internalize anymore. They don't know, how to, formulate that circle of people that they need in their lives to hold them accountable and to be of good godly support to them. They just don't know how to process difficulty without possibly pursuing unhealthy ways to deal with that. What would be your words of encouragement, your words of inspiration to again your younger self or somebody that's like what you used to be that you think would be instrumental for them to be able to deal with challenging and difficult times?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is, I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Catholic schools, right? I grew up in private schools. One thing I told you, my parents sacrificed. What I didn't mention is my high school was for the time was fairly expensive. I actually worked and helped pay my way through high school. But my point in bringing that up is that here I was in a place where, for one, I took theology classes in high school, right? So that book I had to crack open, but I didn't read it to meditate on it as the word tells you to, right? I didn't know how to meditate on the word. I didn't know how to apply the word. So first thing I would tell my younger self is, when you pick up that book, read it and find yourself in it and how you can apply what it's saying, because there's life in that book, right?
Mm,
There's nothing you go through. There's nothing you can go through in life that word doesn't have an answer for. Because I honestly do believe I would have been able to handle if I knew that God loved me unconditionally when I didn't physically have a physical father there. I would have understood, but I do have a heavenly father, and he will never leave me nor forsake me. And there's no good or beneficial thing that he would ever withhold from me. So that would be first. Uh, Read that word to understand that word to then apply that word. Um, the other thing I would tell myself is work harder. I would tell myself to work harder. One of the things I haven't mentioned here is the reason we ended up in school together was because I was recruited to play football there. But I had no, again, what I said about not having my biggest cheerleader there during those years, I think
Mm-hmm.
had a direct correlation to how I handled myself once I got to the higher level of playing sports. Um, and, you know, as a high schooler, I was just more physically gifted than everybody else around me, right? I was the fastest guy. I was the right. I was the fastest guy. I was the quickest guy. I was right. And then you get to college, and everybody's that. Everybody was me in their high school, right? And so, unless they were a lineman, they weren't the fastest, but they probably were the strongest. And I think a diligent work ethic I would have gotten from my father. Right, he would have pushed me much like I've tried to push my kids. So I would say, I would have worked harder. Um, the last thing I definitely would love to tell my younger self, uh, learn principles around money.
Yes.
Really understand money. Money is a tool, right? That money is just a tool, by the way. But in our society, it's a tool that allows us to do things. And I used to have this saying. So I used to convince myself to do dumb stuff all the time. And so I used to have this saying, well, as long as I owe you, you'll never go broke. I used to say that all the time when I was young. Dumbest thing, right? As long as I owe you, you'll never go broke. And so, um, you know, learn how to manage money. It's one of the things right now I'm really working on. One of my adult children is learning how to manage money because a by the way, your credit is actually valuable. The Bible talks about a good name is more valuable than gold or silver. Well, in our society, our credit score is our good name or our bad name, right? It's the decisions we made that got us to a 450 credit score, right? Or the good decisions we made that got us to a 750. Um, and because I had a stupid saying of as long as I owe you, you'll never go broke. I didn't care what was, what I owed people and things of that nature. And so, um, or rubies and gold, I'm sorry, is what the word says. It's more valuable than rubies or gold. And so I would definitely tell my younger self, learn about money. My pastor back home used to say this all the time. And again, those things that stick with you. And I know where I'm about to go. It may feel like I'm going to, kind of talk about race, but I'm really not. This is just what he used to say, and it's valuable. He would say, white people, white parents teach their kids how to save a dollar. Black parents teach their kids how to stretch a dollar. And I used to sit in that congregation of almost 5,000 people going, that's true,
That's true.
right? That's true.
No.
It's and so from that, I have done my best to teach my kids how to save and invest and do other things that I didn't know at their age, so that when they get to 40 years old, uh, they're not wondering how am I going to retire or whatever the case may be. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so those are probably the three things I would definitely tell my younger self.
Yeah, I mean that's solid advice, man. Especially about the money part, because that's just when I think about money, and growing up, and even even in part of my adult life. I mean, it was instilled about making, as Tupac used to say, how to make a dollar out of 15 cents. It was
Right.
that was the thing. You made more money. Okay, that means you could get more stuff. It was, I don't remember. I mean, my mother was a very bright individual. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I give credit to much of my academic prowess to her. But money, that was not. It was a survival thing. It was stretching out
Yep.
that money, stretching out that money, not realizing the significance of credit, not realizing the significance of what is your future going to look like, and and whether or not this was really a need versus just something that you wanted, so
Yes.
as you stated,
It's a
when I
big
think
one.
about rewinding that clock, I wish I had more sense, and I'm gonna just call it what it. I wish I had more sense to not get caught up in that spending thing, because God's been really good in terms of blessing me and my family financially, but I haven't always been good at making smart financial decisions with that
Yep.
blessing, and I've allowed money to get away from me that didn't have to get away from me. Had I just yeah, had I applied those principles that you spoke to, so your pastor was spot on with that, and
Yeah.
yeah, I know it may sound like a race thing, but unfortunately, that was for many of us. That was the reality. For many of us,
It
it
was
was
reality. Yeah.
because again, we were in survival mode, and so when we did have a little extra, oh, we getting ready to party. We getting ready to do what we need to do. So
Hey man, we're going to buy some new bones. We're going to have ourselves a troop
all of
jacket.
that, all of
Some of
that.
y'all don't know what a troop jacket is, but if we was,
Ooh.
what was the satin jackets we used to get? The
Oh,
team jackets,
God.
starter jackets,
Starter
starter
jacket. Yep,
jacket,
yep, yep, yep.
right?
All of that,
You
man.
know, and if I'd have been like, you know what, I'm gonna get me a plain kit. I'm gonna give me some shoes that I know are gonna last and be comfortable. I'm gonna make sure I get a jacket that's gonna keep me warm, and I'm gonna, instead of trying to be. Unfortunately, that's very true in our communities. Trying to, what's the thing they used to say? Trying to keep up with the Joneses,
Hmm.
right? Like that in the black community, unfortunately, is a real thing. Like we are all about trying to dress the part, uh, you know, but we're just faking it, right? Because we're trying to dress the part, we're trying to look the part, we're trying to sound the part. And if you've ever read the book Millionaire Next Door, because by the way, I know a lot of millionaires now, of all races, by the way, and they've just made better decisions. They didn't worry about how it looked to their neighbor, right? They didn't worry about how it looked to their neighbor. If they drove around in a Honda Accord, but they had $100,000 in their savings account,
They were good with that,
they were
you
good
know.
with that.
And like I said, just to reemphasize, I mean, like I said, it's a challenge that we've had, and I know we're a little bit off subject, but it's a challenge that
Yeah,
has been
we
a
are.
common
Sorry.
challenge over the years in the black community. So I mean, we could easily have a whole nother show about that conversation. It's just something that we as a people have struggled with. Does
Right.
that mean it applies to everybody? No, because there have been some of us who have made the smart decisions and handled our monies well. We're just saying it's something that is an area that we definitely stand room for improvement in. Not only for your own individual lives, but community wise, business
Right.
wise, the things that we would be able to do collectively as a culture,
That's exactly right.
to help each other grow our respective businesses, and be able to create jobs and create other opportunities if we had a better mindset of how to manage money. Again, unfortunately, during our times of coming up, that just wasn't what was taught to us, and again, it was just based upon our circumstances. But you know it's never too late to learn.
No,
You've
no,
learned
that's
those
true.
lessons, and you've imparted that into your kids. I'm trying to do do some of that with my own daughter, and just even in my own life, trying to unwind and fix some things that I could have done better decisions, because you get to, like I said, you get older and you start reflecting on that, like, why did I spend that? Why did I do that?
Hmm.
It wasn't even that big of a hype. It wasn't even that big of a deal. I mean, I think back, my very first credit card I got in college, freshman year, American Express card. One of the first things I buy is a full length leather coat that I was rocking in May.
I remember that coat.
You remember that code, right? But then I remember the first summer after school, after freshman year, I remember or after sophomore year, I remember going to one of the stores in the mall in Chicago. Went to flip that card at the counter. Lady said, the screen says take your card. I was like, what? They said take your card. I was like, that was the first and last time I had American Express. That was my very first
Yeah,
card. They took that
I,
card right at the counter
I
and
I
left all
know
my
we
stuff
off
on the
topic.
counter. So it's just crazy, But I
Yeah,
mean, that was
I know we
just
off. I know we off topic, but after my freshman year, I went home. So I actually never got a credit card in college, and here's why. I went home. I was hanging out with a buddy that he went to school at UAPB,
Mhm.
University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, and we are having this conversation, and he's talking about how he got a credit card and that he was ordering pizzas on it and doing all this stuff, and now the card is maxed out, and he ain't got no means. He don't have a means of paying it, right?
Right.
And he's telling me this, and I was like, okay, I haven't done it to this point, and I won't be doing it anytime soon because I
Hmm.
would be tempted to be buying pizzas. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. I mean,
it's funny.
it is funny, man. It just, but again, it's just lessons learned. And,
Yeah,
sometimes we have to go through what we go through, experience those moments to later be able to show somebody else how not to make some of those same mistakes, to be able to
yes, no
pour
doubt.
into that, drop those same nuggets of wisdom. And then again, I take the connection back to God. So now you're not just talking just to be talking. You got the word to back up why we should make the decisions that we're making, and why it's to stay in God's will, what He wants for us, because He doesn't want us stressing out about our finances and things like that. Yet we live in a world where 50% of America lives check to check. So why that
Yes,
is, I mean, there are people, I use this term all the time. There are legitimately some people who are what we call rich broke. Where
yep,
on the surface, they live in a beautiful home, driving beautiful cars, wearing nice clothes, doing all of that. But you have no idea behind the scenes that they are like barely hanging on. It's the facade. It looks good,
yeah,
but they are struggling mightily just to stay afloat. And because they've established this, sort of lifestyle, as we talked about, the keeping up with the Joneses mindset, I got to keep that image up, because if people really found out that I'm really broke, what
that's
would they
it.
think of me?
If they
you
really
know,
found out, that's it.
yeah. So yeah,
So
man, it's powerful lesson. So again, I'm saying we're off topic, but we're not really, because we're just tying it back into what you offered up as your words of wisdom. And one of those things was get on top of your money management sooner rather than later, so you don't have to play this catch up game. You'll already be on top of it
yeah,
and have the proper mindset. So yeah, man. So Kendrick, man, this has been an enjoyable time chopping it up with you, man. You have been a blessing in sharing your story to me, as well as I know to my listeners. I've truly enjoyed it, and appreciate all that you've again shared with us. But before I let you go, as is customary here on the podcast, I do want to take this time to celebrate you, to acknowledge you, to show you some love.
mhm,
So if you got some exciting news, man, like I said, professionally or personally going on that you'd like to share with us, please do so at this time. So again, we can celebrate that.
yeah. You know what, man? God has been good, and He's been faithful. I have a small business here. It's done well. It's done well for our family. We moved here with no friends, no family, didn't know anyone here. And during the worst economic downturn of my lifetime, 2008 is when we moved here, and completely started over with small children. We ended up having the ability, or we sacrificed a lot, but we homeschooled our kids. Um, I have a 25-year-old daughter who's extremely talented. Uh, she went to college and is right now getting ready to finish up her master's degree, and she wants to go directly into her doctorate. Right, so I may have a doctor in the family before the age of 28, which is pretty amazing.
Yes.
Um, so raised three kids who are amazing. My middle one is learning a trade right now and lives here in town. My youngest is finishing up his second year of college. So I have 25, 24, and 20. My wife has a career that she really enjoys. It gives her an opportunity to see other parts of the country and do some things there. I mean, listen, man, I always say I could complain, but who would care, right? Who wants to listen? You can always find things wrong in life. But I think when you come into a relationship with Christ, you find a joy in everything, even in the struggles. And by the way, I hope it's not coming across like it's easy, right? Because
No.
when we moved here, we struggled. We struggled. We pushed through. We stayed together, and we stayed together as a family. And so, truly, one of the greatest, I guess, kind of serendipities of how we raised our children um, is, and I didn't mention this before. My wife is an immigrant, right? My wife is Jamaican, and so so completely different cultures, right? I grew up in the hood. She grew up in the sticks, and so and so literally the sticks. Don't hopefully she won't see this. So and so one of the biggest serendipities is that I was having this conversation with my wife a few weeks ago, and I said, we may we may not feel like we always did it right because raising kids is an adventure, and if I'm waiting to be introduced to the people to do it perfectly. I don't think they exist, but
No.
feel free to introduce. Um, and so I said to her, we may have felt like we missed it sometimes, but we did the best we could with what we knew. Because remember, she's coming in it with how she was raised. I'm coming from how I was raised, and we're trying to find this happy middle ground. I'm just glad we both were okay with spanking, but so spankings happen. But our kids today like call us all the time. My daughter, my youngest they're in different states. My middle one is here, but our kids want to talk to us. They actually seek out advice from us, and a lot of parents in our in our age group and older that have kids that are adults, they never hear from them, and that's not. I would hope it's not because they somehow ostracize their child right from them, but in all the being disciplined or disciplining them, and raising them in a household. Because by the way, before my wife and I were married, we were both Christians. We were both saved. So my kids never knew a household without Christ,
Mhm.
right? And the disciplines that we had put in place because of that, right? So I don't swear, I don't drink, I don't listen to secular music, right? There's these things that, and again, I'm not saying you have to do all this to be saved. Is what, as you know, Joe, I was a DJ, so
Mhm.
music was a big part of my life, and so and to have children that desire to have a relationship with you as they get deeper and deeper into adulthood, to me, that is one of the biggest wins we could have ever developed in life. You know, so that means when it's time for us to need diapers, somebody's going to be willing to help us out. So that's a good thing.
Right. Right. Man, man, that's beautiful, man. I love to hear that. Like I said, I've been, admiring your family from afar, but to hear you verbalize that and express that, I mean, what parent wouldn't want that? I'm very close to my daughter, and it's always my hope that even as she embarks upon adulthood, which happening a little bit sooner than I had expected, because I don't know where the first 16 years went.
Yes,
But
it goes fast.
yeah, man. But she's truly a daddy's girl, and and I hope that in adulthood she will not only embrace the different lessons and things that I've shared, but that also that she has that still maintain that closeness into adulthood and
Yeah,
not, like I said, be a kid that you feel like they couldn't wait to get away from you, versus
yeah,
that
no,
kid
that's
that
right.
they're able to function independently, so they're not needy and dependent upon you, but they still, but the relation, it goes back to the
Yes,
relationship. the relationship is such that I still want to check in on you. I still want to connect with you. I still want to share what's going on with me.
Yep.
All of that is powerful, and it's just, again, it's a testament to you and your wife and how you raised your kids, and of course, letting God be the head of all of that makes all the difference in the world. So yeah,
It
man,
does.
so we definitely going to celebrate that. We're going to love on you for that, man, and ask for God's continuing covering and prayers over you, your kids, your wife, and your business and everything else that you touch, man. I don't have any reason to believe that God is done with you. There's still more to do. And I'm just excited for you, and just personally, just as one brother to another, just proud of you, man. I'm glad to
Amen.
hear
Thank you.
that things are going well with you, and I'm just looking forward for more good news and happenings to come out of your life, and just seeing how God is using you. So awesome
Amen.
stuff. And for my listeners, if you've enjoyed, our content, what we're talking about, what we're doing here on the Blessings in the Street podcast, please share, please like, please comment, please subscribe, because this is what it's all about. This podcast is about encouraging, inspiring, uplifting, sharing of our personal stories in a very transparent and authentic way, with the hopes of being able to touch some areas in your life that you can take some gems, some nuggets from, and immediately apply, and use it to your benefit to grow, to be a better version of yourself. But most importantly, as you can hear throughout our broadcast, we're emphasizing the relevance and the significance of having God at the head of it all. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't currently have a relationship with God, I would implore you, I would, practically beg of you, make that decision today. And I promise you, it'll be the best decision you will ever make. You've heard myself, you've heard Kendrick. We're not telling you something that we heard. We're telling you something that we know from personal experience as to
Right.
how God moves. And we're not telling you that all storms in life are going to be easy, that they're not going to be difficult and challenging times. But when you start looking at your storms as not being a negative event, but looking at them as an opportunity to, again, to grow and to be a better version of yourself, that God doesn't allow these storms to come at you because he's trying to hurt you. He's trying to take you out. He's trying to bring you, he's trying to level you up. He's trying to get you prepared
Mm.
and ready for some things that you may not even know that's coming, but there's some blessings that lie ahead, not only for you personally, but for you to be utilized as a blessing to other people, because we were created to serve. And so you need to know how to properly do that, and God is the best source. His word is, as Kendrick spoke of earlier, it has the answers to everything that you need to know. Whatever the aspect of life that you got going on is right there. So delve into that, embrace it, and embrace that relationship with him. So remember, here at the Blessings in the Street podcast, this is a place where your story is your glory, where your relationships are relevant, and your journey is your joy. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, you hang in there, fight that good fight, keep persevering, keep pushing through. Allow God to be the head of it all. Lean on him for understanding, lean on him for guidance, lean on him for that direction. God never intended for us to operate in life solo. It's all about the relationships. Make sure he's a part of all your relationships, and I promise you, he will not lead you astray. He is the ultimate problem solver, the ultimate comforter, the ultimate encourager. He can be your biggest cheerleader, even in those moments where you feel like there's no one else around you. He's always there, and he wants nothing more to embrace that relationship and to have that presence and that commune with you. So with that said, you take care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great evening, and I've enjoyed hanging out with you.